Brothers. Got a question for you guys. Where exactly is the line between exploitation and documentation? It's a question that I've pondered for quite some time as a journalist, yet haven't really reached a definitive answer on. Is it ethical to film somebody in an extremely vulnerable state if what you've captured delivers an important message about the historical realities of that moment? It seems to be a question that each prominent documentary filmmaker has a different answer to. I've generally followed the motto, shoot most things and then make the decision in post-production on whether or not to publish it to the world. But the first time I can recall actually withholding footage forever was back in 2018 when a teenager freely confessed to an accidental homicide in Louisiana. And then a year later in 2019 when I stumbled upon an illegal, full-nude Down syndrome strip club in Alabama, wherein the stripper poles were installed in the beds of pickup trucks that were gathered in a circle and the cash tips were going to the parents of the dancers. In an ideal world, I would have called the sheriff, but the sheriff was there drinking a beer. There's also been other situations where I declined to interview somebody for ethical reasons. Most recently, 2 weeks ago, actually about 3 weeks ago now, but I made contact with an escaped New Orleans jail inmate named Antoine Massie, who's since been captured. He hit me up on Instagram about doing an in-person interview about the conditions inside jail that made him want to escape, which I was very excited to conduct before learning that Antoine Massie was convicted of some crimes that aren't so cool. Cool crimes to me is like bank robbery, wire fraud, or petty cocaine possession, not aggravated domestic battery. Still, given the news value of the story, I was still down for a quick interview if I could establish early on that he was in jail for bad reasons, but then Mr. Massie asked me for a $500 Cash App deposit, which my lawyer told me would be considered aiding and abetting a fugitive, so I had to pass. Anyways, some of my favorite documentary films and movies have been ones that did walk that line. I can remember the Harmony Korine movie called Gunmo that I saw in high school, which wasn't a documentary film, but it kind of felt like one. And it featured scenes of glue-huffing, animal-abusing kids in Ohio doing some crazy stuff. Though it was hard on the eyes, there was a deeper message about the spiritual melancholy in the post-industrial rural Midwest around the turn of the millennium, which, if you can remember, if you were alive during Y2K, was an era marked by liberal optimism and the celebration of technological advancement. Despite being called the worst film of the year by the New York Times in 1999, who considered the film to be crass and exploitative, Korine defended Gunmo, explaining that he was merely acting as a passive voyeur in an existent reality, who happened to press record in a typical environment that's outside the confines of polite society. However, there have been other celebrated controversial documentary films where the director went beyond the role of a voyeur and actually imposed his will on the primary subject of the film to make a point. One of those was The Act of Killing, directed by Joshua Oppenheimer, released in 2012. The film, if you haven't seen it, follows a man named Anwar Congo, who is the leader of a US-backed anti-communist death squad that perpetrated the Indonesian mass killings of 1965, which killed up to 100,000 people. In the third act of the film, Oppenheimer helps to organize a theatrical reenactment of these exact massacres, wherein Congo must play a victim of the massacres in one of the scenes, which caused him to undergo a panic attack and temporarily come to terms with the harm that he'd caused. Though ultimately Congo did snap back into denialism and bravado. Now, in facilitating this transformative theatrical moment, Oppenheimer stepped beyond the role of a passive documentarian to create plot structure, and he was really heralded as a genius for doing that, and I kind of agree. I think it's an amazing film. But today, we're not going to be talking about Harmony Korine or Joshua Oppenheimer. We're going to be talking about a film that received really only controversy without much props outside the skateboard and graffiti worlds, despite being the highest sold underground DVD of 2002, selling over 250,000 copies. That film was called Bum Fights Volume 1, A Cause for Concern. It was created and distributed by four then high school students from La Mesa, California and Las Vegas, who took inspiration from the wild, wild internet of the late 90s and early 2000s in the wake of Gummo and Jackass success, when America's countercultural youth was in a sociopathic arms race to make the craziest content possible. Bum Fights, as the name implies, featured videos of bums fighting, and mostly revolved around the life and times of Donnie and Rufus, two homeless individuals known to La Mesa, California high school kids as the local stunt bums, far before the camera started rolling. For reference, Donnie and Rufus were hardened local alcoholics who'd become micro-celebrities in the area for a proposition they'd often make to teenagers. Give us beer and we'll do any stunt you'd like in return, whether it be running into milk crates, getting inside of shopping carts and running into walls, pulling teeth out, and beyond. So a group of kids decided to film them and pay extra beer and extra money for crazier and crazier stunts. Those youths were Ryan McPherson, Daniel Tanner, Zachary Bubeck, and Michael Slyman, who put together bum fights to show other kids in the area. adding a cause for concern to the end of the title to emphasize the fact that they believed that what they put together was a mirror of street life that reflected the uncomfortable realities and how far some people will go to feed their addictions. The problem was, Ryan and the guys were the ones paying for it. Needless to say, bum fights traveled from La Mesa across the entire planet at a rate in which the videographers couldn't imagine, resulting in widespread condemnation for obvious reasons, lawsuits, and even the arrest of the directors for illegal prize fighting. In far over their heads, Ryan, then not even 20 years old, sold the rights away for all future sequels and stepped away from bum fights for good, to focus on an independent artistic venture called Indicline, which today has evolved into one of the most radical and, you guessed it, controversial art collectives in the country. They've installed life-sized, butt-naked, nude statues of Trump across the country, painted giant anti-war murals on military training grounds, hijacked dozens upon dozens of billboards, usually with anti-consumerist messaging, and even installed the largest piece of illegal graffiti in US history out in the Mojave Desert. So essentially, they're still inciting chaos, but in a controlled, direct manner, not involving the homeless.